If you were to choose a weak point in this painting to show that it couldn't possibly have been painted by Vermeer, it would probably be the chair. With its giant finials and swollen belly of a seat, it looks rough, imprecise, and nothing like the fashionable Spanish chairs that Vermeer often painted. It's also quite unlike the Spanish chair that de Hoogh painted in his version of this painting. And perhaps therein lies the tell. After all, why would an artist who was copying de Hoogh's painting make such a drastic departure from de Hoogh's scheme? We know whoever painted this can paint pretty much anything. We saw that in the last episode. And we already know that in this painting he chose not to depict the house opposite the courtyard that the de Hoogh painting shows, and that the light and the colour and the two main people are quite different to the de Hoogh painting. But if it's a copy, then why paint such a strange chair? But what if the chair actually does the opposite? What if it shows that the chair is in fact a standalone masterpiece that represents Vermeer's technique so faithfully that it can only have been painted by someone with an extraordinarily intimate knowledge, perhaps someone like Vermeer himself? Welcome back to Vermeer's Child, where in this episode we're going to try and make sense of this chair and see how it relates to the wall behind it and the picture frame above. In the last episode, I didn't try and relate any of the techniques we saw to Vermeer. I just don't have enough access to trustworthy photographs showing the paint texture of his paintings. I'll show you what I mean by trustworthy. You see, if I trusted the photos of his paintings that are online, I'd assume that all the paintings are bowling ball smooth. For example, this painting of the guitar player is said to be unlined, on its original stretches, and very fragile. The purpose of lining paintings is to stop losses that you can see on my painting, and also to hold the little islands of paint that make up the surface flat. Yet remarkably, the paint surface on this painting looks completely flat. After more than 350 years, it just can't be flat. So I think that's an artefact of the photo, not the painting. But I've got no way of knowing what the surface of the painting actually looks like. To give you a better example from a painting that I think is much closer in age to my painting, look at this internet photo of Vermeer's view of Delft. Again, it looks like it has no texture. But look at this photo of Vermeer's view of Delft from the catalogue of the Rijksmuseum's massive 2023 Vermeer exhibition. This is what the painting actually looks like, stripped naked of its security enclosure, photographed in raking light. You'd think that these are two different paintings. The book that gave me the most insight into what Vermeer's paintings actually look like is the Mauritshuis publication Vermeer Illuminated, that detailed aspects of the 1994 restoration of Vermeer's two greatest paintings, his View of Delft and Girl with a Pearl Earring. When I ordered it, I had visions of a great thumping doorstop of a book, but in fact it's so lightweight it's just about made of helium. The photos that were of interest to me were also disappointingly tiny, but they did at least show paintings that in the surface appearance are remarkably similar to my painting. I want to start this little section by having a look at an iPhone video of the painting, and the chair section in particular, starting from the very bottom. Now, it's a wobbly video, but I'll explain why we're doing it a bit later. But there's something about videos, particularly when you take them with a bit of raking light, that actually helps you to see what's going on in a painting, sometimes better than a photograph. And I think it's probably just the sheer number of frames being captured as the light moves across the painting. So let's have a quick look at this, and then we'll go back and I'll show you what it is I'm trying to emphasise. Now obviously it doesn't need to be this wobbly. I could have put it on a tripod, but what I was trying to do was just to see if I could pick up some of the objects that were hidden in the shadows of the painting. And it's looking up at some of the things that we had in the last episode. Okay, let's just stop it now and go right back to the start of it. Okay, what I want you to notice is these little objects catching light in the painting. So these bits of impasto are actually painted objects of some sort. There's something around the legs of the chair, around the rails of it, across the front here, and you can see that there's something more going on here. Now, I've never been able to actually get it to be clear enough to see exactly what they are, and I suspect the painting would have to be cleaned before we could actually find out what they are and what they're supposed to represent. Also, if you just notice the texture of the floor, because we're going to have a look at a Vermeer painting in a minute that has very similar colours and texture on it. But see just there in that little triangle, I think that indicates it's a yellow. It indicates that this has actually been painted over, this terracotta colour has been formed over a yellow base. And I think that's because the light in this area of the room is predominantly yellow, and so he's chosen a yellow base for this part of the chair. You can see underneath the chair, I'm talking about all this impasto that's out here, but you can see underneath it's actually quite clear of any of that. So whatever's going on out here, I mean, part of it will be just cracks and things, bending bits of paint up, but there's actually a bit of a figure eight thing hanging from the chair here, and there's some sort of a clear section there. We'll have a look at some of those in a bit of detail in a moment, but let's just go back up the chair again. You can see that there's something going on here that is next to the chair. That's the top left stud of the chair, which is quite visible, and the left side of the leather actually runs down in a line around about here. You can actually just pick up the edge of it just running there, and it goes round. And it's actually scalloped on this chair. It's not a straight edge. It's got a bit of shape to it. We'll have a look at that in detail in a minute. You can see the left finial detail there, and there is something outside of the left finial, and the right finial. You can see the edge of the right finial there, and it's got this dark area just to the left of it, which I'm not 100% sure what it is. It seems to have something attached to the outside of it here, which we'll have a look at as well. But the main thing is to note that there's an object here, and that object appears to go up the painting and relate in some way to this area above. And we looked at a silver object in the last episode that attached to the base of this golden column that runs straight up the painting. So on this side, this area runs more into shadow, but there is something along here, and again we'll have a look at that in a jiff. I'll just take it up a bit further, and you can see how the colours change. There's green being used here, and then it goes into this golden yellow colour where this thing looks a bit like a harpy to me. Okay, let's just get in and have a look a bit closer at some of this. You can pick up some of the edges here of some of the detail of this finial as well while we're there. Some of these things are a lot harder to see in photographs than they are in actual video. We'll come back to the object that's on the left side of the back of the chair in a few minutes. But let's first of all just deal with references to other paintings by Vermeer. And there's some really obvious ones in this particular area of the painting. We'll have a look at this little platform that it's sitting on, that the chair's sitting on. There is something a little bit similar in colour in a Vermeer painting, but the thing that really sticks out, the use of 3 different colours for his highlights. There's a cream sort of a colour here. It's not white, it's cream. There's a yellow with a bit of green in it there, and then there's this terracotta colour. And you'll see that the highlight that runs down the left side of the leg is basically terracotta with some little round dots of highlight as well. So I'll just have a look at this a bit closer. You can see a little bit of cream here. There's that sort of creamy colour there, and you can see there's both green and yellow in here, and as you run down you get these little blurry dots of paint on the left hand side, and you get some terracotta on that rail. Now the painting that we're going to look at is Vermeer's View of Delft, because he uses multiple colours for the highlights on the boats. So we'll just go to that now. So this is a close-up of a section of Vermeer's View of Delft, and you'll see that this boat on the left-hand side of the painting has a cabin on it that is similar in texture. It's that broken colour of terracotta that is very similar in texture and colour to the little platform on the floor of my painting. You can also see he's used a bit of a white highlight there and a grey highlight along the rubbing strake of the boat. Let's go back a little bit and we'll find some other colours that he's used. Let's go to the boat on the right to start with, and you'll see that he's got lots of these little dots of colour, of course. He's used blue with that creamy brown colour, pretty much identical to the colour that I've got on the top rail of my chair. Blue, I think he's chosen blue because it's the dominant colour of the sky above, just as in my painting. The artist has chosen yellow for the most dominant highlight, which is the middle rail, but quite a similar treatment of paint. Again, there's that terracotta colour on that boat over on the far side. Let's have a look over on these boats, is similar as well. He's put a few dots of yellow in here, but he's used blue, cream, terracotta, just touching up and picking out the highlights. And I think if my painting was cleaned back, the colours would brighten up very similar to these. So I think we can say that the highlights on my painting are not dissimilar at all. Let's just have a look at the size of some of these things just before we start to look in detail at it. The reason is that when you take photographs of things, you completely lose the size relativity with the actual painting, and so you can't actually tell how big anything is. So just to help you out, the finials at the top of this are about 5mm across their bases. So they're just the black bits to the outside. And you can see there's another bit been added onto this, which has got, that's that object we're going to have a look at. So the side of this is probably a little bit more than 5mm, so it's 5mm is just under 1/4 of an inch. The little stud up in the top left corner is 1mm about, and it's painted in 2 colours. We'll have a look at that in some detail as well. And the leather across the back of the chair from the outside edge, which is just to the left of where that little thumb is on this silly hand thing, over to here, that's about 18mm, so just under 3/4 of an inch. Really quite small. And finally, something that is of a lot of interest is this top black rail of the chair. That's about 1mm as well. As you can see, it's about the same height as this little stud here. So it's about 1mm. Now, the other thing to notice with this chair is that its colour is black everywhere, apart from where light catches the edges. And I think it actually depicts a chair that's been cast or forged from metal, and there's a reason that that'll fit very nicely with our story, but I think it's also a fact because when you get into some of the details of it, they do look like melted or moulded metal rather than carved wood. Initially I thought it was just carved wood that had been ebonised or painted very black, but I'm pretty confident that it actually depicts a metal chair. So quite different from anything else in any other Vermeer paintings, and I think that if it is meant to be metal, then it shows that it's probably not a practical chair. It's a chair that's been designed to fit with a story, not a chair that's designed to be a real chair. It's supposed to look like a real chair, obviously, but I think it's a chair that's been specifically painted to fit in with another story, and we'll see what that story is in a minute. So let's look now at the top left corner of the chair. And you can see that this is where the leather scallops around, and it scallops around this stud, and the stud, as I mentioned, is about 1mm across, and you can see it's actually been painted in a couple of different colours, and it's got brown around the edges, and it's got this yellow bright star highlight right in the middle of it. So really quite an extraordinary achievement, it seems to me, to be able to paint something that's less than 1mm or 1mm in 2 different colours, so that each bit of colour is way less than 1mm. Now on the top rail, which I mentioned is only about 1mm high, you can start to get an idea of why I think this is metal, and you can see some very sharp edges to it and bumps up and down. There's shapes within it as well, and some silver objects that are on top of it, just so that we can define what's silver and what's dirt on this painting. This little bit here, that's just obviously just a bit of dust. Some of these little highlights will be just dirt that will clean off later on, and some won't be. But some of these things are silver, and you can see this one here actually has a top edge that's black and just a little bit of silver catching the edge of it as it comes around. Whatever it is, I'm not quite sure. It comes around here. It looks like it comes down there, and then there's a bit that's actually sticking out of the painting, and it makes me wonder whether this artist actually didn't incorporate actual silver thread into the painting itself. Maybe these shapes, I mean, see this one over here that looks like a wing shape. It definitely looks like it's real silver, and where it cuts over some of the cracks in the painting, it seems to have held intact, which makes me wonder whether it's whether he's actually somehow worked little pieces of actual silver into the painting. And you can see things like this are just dust and dirt on the painting, but when you come across here, you can see that whatever that is actually silver, and it looks like a little bit of a jewel. It seems to have some other components to it there. And you'll note that where this stud is, there's some sort of a little fixing just above it that seems to hold the leather back into the chair. So whoever has painted this has been completely fastidious about making it real. And you can see the figuring that makes me think that that this is supposed to represent cast metal. It actually does look like it's just liquid metal being actually pulled from a mould. Quite incredible ridges and details across the whole thing. So just looking at the top rail, you can see some objects appear on it, and as it comes across, this is the area that looks dark, that's just on the left hand side of the right finial, and it actually seems to cross over this rail as if there's something painted up this side. But what that is and how that works in terms of the painting, I'm not sure. You can see that this is the finial's only that wide, and this, when you stand back, it actually looks like it's part of the finial, but it's not. It's something just attached to it or connected to it. This is that sunburst shape that we looked at in the previous episode, and when you get a bit closer to it, as in this photograph, you can see that these actually seem to take on the shapes of leaves, and they're quite specifically shaped. And I'm wondering now whether, rather than a sunburst, this is actually perhaps a lotus pattern, because you can sort of see it sits in here quite nicely. And if it is a lotus pattern, it sort of fits extremely nicely with with my theory as to what we're actually looking at here. A lot of what you can see across the back of it, the little tiny white highlights, are going to be just dirt on the surface of the painting, but you can see the scalloping leather. There's also an intersection of some sort that comes down over the back of where the leather is, and then the leather kicks back up and goes along the top. The top rail, as you can see, is just like the rest of it. It's sort of highly figured, and it has some little decorations along the top of it. Most of this is never going to be able to be clearly seen until the painting's actually cleaned. But my fear in cleaning it too early is that we might actually lose some of these things, which I think are actually painted objects along the back. I think there's some symbols along the back here of the painting, and I'm really confident that this thing that's here is some sort of a jewelled item, but I'm not sure what it's got. You can actually see the studs through it, and you can actually see it's got thickness on one side and thickness on that side. So it's actually some sort of a silver object hanging down from the back of the painting. Some of these white bits are just dirt, just a bit of dust on the painting. You can even see little beads in the leather, and the leather is incredibly highly detailed. So whoever painted this, had someone with formal training. They knew how to depict a surface of leather, and when all that dirt finally gets removed, we'll get to see the leather in all of its glory. I'm not sure these white highlights always looked quite wrong on the back of it, and I imagine that someone had, dropped them on later. But some of them seem to have little bits of silver that fixes them, and these dots in them look suspiciously like they're supposed to be some sort of an animal skin. But they are, again, very strange because, this is the diamond on the back of the chair, and this thing just sort of hangs off it a bit. When you get into the leather, you can see that it's got nice patterning all over it, quite incredibly detailed. Again, I'm not sure how anyone would have painted such fine details, bearing in mind that this is a 1mm stud. How you get detail that looks like that's way less than a millimetre. And you can see there's little balls or embossed things in the leather, almost sort of jewelled looking. How you do those when they'd only be a quarter of a millimetre or something, it's quite incredible, really. But again, you can see this is the area that I think that there's an object here. But when you see it in a photograph, that's what I'm getting at. You actually flattens it out so much that you've got no prospect of telling what it is from a straight photograph. But I'll show you what that looks like now when we catch a little bit of the light that's in that area. So when we open an iPhone photo of the same area, you can see that there is something in there. This one I've chosen particularly because it looks like it's an animal. Perhaps a bird with a beak, a wing held up over its head, or because this seems like a branch with some feet on it and a tail of some sort running down. But look, I'm not 100% sure what it is, to be quite honest, but there's certainly something along that side of the chair which is not the chair itself. The edge of the chair is just along that sort of line to where the thumb is. The other thing that's worth having a quick notice of while we're on the back here in an iPhone photo is that the phone seems to think that there's some letters across the back here, and there is some support for that. They could be symbols of some sort, but there's patterns there that look a lot like letters. In fact, when you look at the top up there, that even seems to run over. It's of course impossible to tell with this stage, but it's interesting that the phone, being a computer that actually processes far more than a normal camera does, always tends to try and find the edges of shapes and expose for both highlights and shadows. So it always gives quite an interesting effect and is really useful. In fact, I found many things in this painting because of the phone rather than because of my larger cameras. I just want to draw your attention to the right finial, and there's an object on it which looks to me like a jewel, like a painted jewel, a silver jewel with little coloured beads or some sort of little coloured decorations in it. Now we're going to see this a few times on this painting because there's another one on the chair which is not particularly clear, so I won't worry about that. But down the buttons, where you expect to find buttons of the woman's black top, there are these things, and there's also one in her hair. Width-wise, it's probably a couple of millimetres wide. But when we have a look at the other ones, you'll see that they have a bit of shape to them and they look like they have some fixings on them. Impossible to paint, you would imagine, but I think you'll find that this whole thing is just incredibly detailed. Just before we have a look at the seat of the chair, there's a couple of other little things I want to point out. The first one is this area of shadow on the wall to the right of the back of the chair, right up against the edge, and the shadow, as a matter of interest, does run right to the very edge of the painting. Now, I don't think it's a shadow at all. I think it's supposed to look like a shadow, but I think it's actually got hinges on it. They're extremely difficult to pick up, but there's one that runs off the bottom of the chair here and runs across to this thing here. There's one at the top. I think there's another one here, and there's definitely something down the bottom of it. Now, they're hellishly difficult to see, but you can actually pick up the edge of the whole thing running up along here, along the edge of the painting. And I think what this is again, part of the story. These, I think, are designed to slam what's supposed to look like a door shut when someone sits on the chair. Now, I know that sounds completely wacky, but I'll explain the whole thing in a minute. But I'm pretty confident that when this gets cleaned up, we're going to see that that's not a bit of black shadow on the wall. We're going to see that these things, these strange lines that are connecting it to the edge of the chair, and that one just running across there, we're going to see that these are actually some sort of a hinge mechanism painted again to tell part of a story. One final thing before we get on and have a look at the actual seat itself. There are objects underneath the seat. I think there's something wound around a couple of these rails here, but there is certainly something that comes down and comes across right perhaps to the front of the painting. So you can sort of get an idea of some shapes there. Now, I don't think they're just random shapes. I think there's actually something painted there which is part of this whole mechanism business, which again is part of a mythological story. And that'll all become clear now when we have a look at what this seat actually depicts. So what I want to do now is to see whether we can stitch all of these disparate elements together to make some sense. And the most unusual of the lot is this seat, this big half-moon seat. And of course my inclination when I first saw this was that the seat just didn't make any sense at all, and I thought, oh, maybe it's got this black bit in the middle of it, maybe someone's come along and painted over the top of where a cushion used to be. But I don't think that's the case at all, and in fact I think this seat is actually exactly what it's supposed to look like. What I think is happening here, it became apparent when I actually started to look carefully at what this black bit in the centre of it was. And there is a story, a mythological story, that makes sense of the whole thing. If you have a look in the middle of it, you'll see that there's some little bits of silver, little dots and little areas of silver, and there's quite a large object here, and there's a slightly smaller one over there. Don't get too hung up on those at the moment. I'll show them in a better photo in a second. But you can see there's this smear of silver shapes through the centre of the whole thing. And this one here looks a bit like the bridle of a horse. And that's exactly what I think it is. So what I think's happening here is that there's horses through the middle of it and they're towing a chariot. And I think what it's supposed to represent is the sun chariot of Helios, or Apollo, both Apollo and Helios in Greek mythology rode the sun chariot across the sky in the morning and lit the sky. And there's quite a lot of talk in the old myths about the early morning colour of the sky and the first light that starts to light from the east. Now this chariot is heading from right to left. Helios had 4 horses who towed his chariot. They were winged horses. I don't know whether they were silver horses, but they were winged. And it occurred to me that what these horses might be flying across the top of is a landscape. And it's an interesting landscape though, because the other thing that looks different about this landscape is that it's got this sort of these puckery orange and yellow flowing marks, and here it actually looks like it is flowing. Perhaps something is flowing, and I wondered whether or not this might be a representation of lava. Now I know it sounds completely wacky, but the other thing you need to be aware of is that the craftsman who made the armaments for all of the gods, the 12 or the 11 other Greek gods, was a god named Hephaestus. And Hephaestus was the god of craftsmen and artisans, and in particularly blacksmiths. And so finding bits of metal and things that look like they're forged in a painting could mean the work that's being depicted as the work of Hephaestus. And the story of Hephaestus is interesting because when he was born, he was so ugly and disfigured that his mother, the Queen of Heaven, Hera, kicked him off Mount Olympus, and he fell into the ocean and was raised by oceanids. And he learned how to be a smith on one of the islands, and then he became an absolute master craftsman and ended up building this magic chair. And the chair was so beautiful that his mother sat down on it, but the chair entrapped her. She wasn't able to leave the chair, and so he had his revenge. I'm thinking that what we might be seeing here with the empty throne in the painting and this strange chair with its dawn sky-like appearance, and what could well be horses and a chariot being towed through the centre of it, is a representation of that magic chair. Now, of course, whether it is or not will be able to be seen when we have a look at the two people, the woman and the boy. And obviously, if they bear no resemblance to gods or people who have some secret clothing on them that might depict them to be gods, if you look closely enough, then the whole story falls apart. But if they do, then I think this is the story that we're looking at. And of course, the other name for Hephaestus in the Roman tradition, because the Romans adopted the Greek gods but renamed most of them, was Vulcan. And Vulcan was the god responsible for volcanic explosions and eruptions. And I'm thinking that this actually does look like a volcano, and we'll have a look at that in a minute. And this does look like a lava flow. So we'll have a look at that in a minute as well. But it's a complex story for something that's in the middle of a painting and completely unexpected. But there it is. I think that this painting has a mythological story wrapped up in it. And I think there's lots of clues to what it is. And my best guess is that that's the story that we're actually looking at. So this is an image that I've darkened up a bit so that we can hopefully pick out some of the contrast. Will give us some edges of these horses. And I guess you'll see here, this is why I'm pretty scathing about the idea of cleaning old paintings before you know what's in them, because it would be pretty easy to miss something like this, which is just about impossible to see. But if you look here, you'll see that's the bridle I was talking about of the horse, and there's a body of a horse coming back here and legs out the front, and it's got a large plumage on the top of it, or some sort of a symbolic plumage. You can see it flying out the top, and that's what this is. This is the same thing for another horse. It's a bit hard to pick out that horse, but it's in this area just there, and you can see they've also these animals also have fancy coverings by the look of it, of jewels or whatever, very decorative. So that's the first horse that I think I can see. It's in that area there with legs out the front. And the second one is in here, and its bridle is just here. It's much harder to see, but this image is really for the purpose of having a look at what I believe is the chariot. And it's this object in the middle here. That's the right-hand side of it, and there's a wheel here. So I'll just zoom up so you can have a look. So you can see very clearly a hub with a red dot in the middle, and you can see spokes around the outside. Now, I don't know a lot about old paintings, but I can tell you that paint doesn't ever fall randomly in shapes like this on a painting. Someone had to put it there, that silver hub with the red dot in it and these coloured spokes that are radiating out, those didn't get there by accident. Now, I don't know whether it's a four-wheel chariot, and there's some more out the front, but you can see the tub of the chariot just there. And if you look above it, there's something silver coming up, and again, looks like a large urn hanging in here. The driver is this little guy just at the back there. You can just see his head, and he's wearing some sort of a fancy headdress. And flowing behind here are what looks like pots to me, urns or pots, and I couldn't find a reference for those. You can get an idea of the shape of one there. Looks like it's got a lid on it. These ones are a little less distinct, but they seem to be flowing off in a line. And the first one, which is cup-shaped, is actually just, I think, just there. And you can see little bands around the chariot, and it's the wheel down there. So I still haven't quite tracked down the reference of what's supposed to be in these urns. I don't know whether it was the oil to light the fire, to light the sky in the morning, or whatever. So is there anything that plausibly ties artists from the 1650s, and in particular Vermeer, with anything to do with volcanoes? Well, we know that the oldest Vermeer painting that we know of is a painting called Diana and Her Companions, and that's from around 1653 to 1656. Now, Diana is the goddess of the hunt and of nature and woodlands, etc., and she is a Roman goddess, or a Greek equivalent as Artemis. Importantly, though, she was also the goddess of the moon, and we know that Vermeer depicted her because she's got a moon on her forehead in the painting. Artemis wasn't as associated with the moon. So what's interesting about her is that she had a twin brother who was the god Apollo, and Apollo's the god of the sun, who did ride the sun chariot. So it's at least possible that a painter who depicted one sibling might depict the other one in a painting. But what's all this got to do with volcanic landscapes? And how would Vermeer as a painter have even known how to depict a volcanic landscape? Well, if you imagine that you're a 19-year-old and you're precociously talented and you're sitting in damp Holland when the sunrise and sunset suddenly become stained with some brilliant red from the once-in-a-lifetime volcanic eruption of Europe's biggest active volcano, Mount Etna. Do you sit and wonder, or do you pack up and go and see this incredible sight, and on the way take in the wonders of Italian art? Now, Etna erupted for several years between 1651 and 1653, and again had a massive explosion in 1669. So I guess it's reasonably compelling that an artist might want to go and see a site like that, particularly probably before he was married. So it's all speculative, of course, but at least it's a speculation that's got a few opportunities to make it work. I'll just come back to our little view of what does look a bit like a volcano, and we're looking at this little ridge here, of course, and I don't know whether this black hole could be some sort of a caldera or whatever, and this could be a lava flow coming out of the side of it. There certainly do seem to be some little steam vents coming out of the ground here, but that could be something completely different, of course. But anyway, that's my speculation, that this is a lava flow. And why that fits very nicely in terms of Etna in particular is that the workshop of Hephaestus in mythology, and Vulcan for that matter in the Roman equivalent mythology, was beneath Mount Etna. So we have that mountain erupting at that time when probably Vermeer had an opportunity to go and see it, and it would perhaps lead to this idea of depicting this amazing sight. Now, the mythical monster Python was also thought to live beneath Mount Etna, and that's why the earth shook whenever the monster turned over. And I wonder whether some of these strange shapes that are under this chair might be in some way related to a depiction of that. Of course, that's just pure speculation because they're just impossible to see, but there does seem to be some sort of a strange coiled object underneath this chair. But whatever it is, I just assumed it was part of the mechanism that made the whole thing slam shut. But again, that's speculation upon speculation. But there's certainly something unusual under this that's not part of the chair itself. So if you've made it this far into this episode, I thought I might just leave you with one final look at the wall that we looked at last week. Now, you would have seen I included a couple of unusual looking photographs that looked a bit like this. And what these are is this is an iPhone photograph of a computer screen. And what that does is it sort of reprocesses the photo that's on the screen, so you can actually see even more detail because the computer in the iPhone actually re-enhances the image again. Now, it's not adding anything that wasn't already there, it's just making it an awful lot clearer, although you do get this sort of strange pixelation which doesn't help. But there is one thing that you might be wondering, well, where's the king of the gods? He pops in and out of mythology all the time. Zeus, or Jupiter, as he's known to the Romans, was always popping in and out and interfering with people, and he took on various guises. He quite often appears as an eagle, but he also, you might recall in the story of Europa, appeared as a white bull. And if you have a look up in the very top right-hand corner of this, there's actually a shape which is very much like the head of a bull. You can see there's an eye there, and there is actually some sort of a bolt through its nose, and there's an ear that actually intersects with the bottom of that painting. And I don't know whether it's actually what I think it is, but I think it certainly looks like that. And when you see it on a clearer image, there seems to be something hanging from its mouth. So after only 2 episodes of looking at the actual painting, we've certainly departed a long way from De Hoog's painting. We seem to have a whole corner of this painting that's completely and quite excitingly different. In the next episode, we're going to look at everything other than the woman and the child, so there's certainly a lot of ground to cover, and there will be some very significant Vermeer references. And then finally, in the last 2 episodes, we'll be focused on the woman and the boy. I'm sorry this has been such a long episode, but it's hard to have just a brief visit to the complex gods of Mount Olympus. I hope you'll come back for the next episode. Thanks very much for watching.